people in the media have been saying, and a lot of others as well, saying this is kind of the most important election in our lifetimes. And I think one of the big reasons that they are talking about that in that way is because who the incumbent is in Donald Trump. We've seen throughout his administration just a lot of breaking of basic norms of politics. And I think that a lot of people are thinking that, you know, if he was so unconstrained during a first term, how unconstrained would he be during a second term? You know, it's a question of, you know, what would he try to do if he loses? And of course, the one thing is a lot of that would be a margin. If somebody loses big, it's hard to contest that versus if they lose by a smaller margin. The other thing is, you know, one of the two parties is going to lose. Either the Democrats are going to lose or the Republicans are going to lose. I mean, it looks like, barring some major change, that Trump is going to lose. But, you know, let's just kind of assume that it could go either way. You know, if Trump does lose, then where does the Republican Party go after this? But, you know, does the party still stick with him kind of as their leader? Or are there other people that try to take the party away from kind of almost kind of the cult personality that you kind of have with Trump? You know, are there people that are trying to go back and say, we're a party of limited government and free trade and all these other things that were more about ideas instead of a person? Conversely, the other thing is, let's say if Biden were to lose, the left of the party, I think that they would immediately start saying, well, okay, we nominated another moderate again, and we got the same result, we lost. So I think that that gives them a lot more juice in future, probably in elections, say in 2024, to try to dominate more the Democratic Party. The one thing to remember about gerrymandering is that it's not just about the shape of seats. So there are actually several different kinds of gerrymandering. So the kind of gerrymandering I think that a lot of people are more familiar with today is political gerrymandering. So, you know, one party manipulating the lines of districts to gain an advantage. It doesn't necessarily have to be that you're drawing, you know, weird shaped districts. One thing to think about as far as political gerrymandering is if you have one party consistently winning a majority of seats with a minority of the vote. So basically that the way you've drawn the lines are upsetting the premise of majority rule. There's also racial gerrymandering. Racial gerrymandering sometimes to try to benefit minorities, sometimes racial gerrymandering trying to burden minorities. So it can kind of go either way. The other thing to remember is that racial gerrymandering can take on different forms, as can political gerrymandering. So the classic types of gerrymandering that you have for both of them are what we know as packing and cracking. So what you usually would want to do is to pack as many of your opponent's political supporters. So if you're a Republican drawing the maps, you want to try to concentrate as many Democrats in as few districts as possible. And then in other parts of the state, maybe you find areas that have Democratic concentrations and you split them up. The problem for Democrats in political gerrymandering is that because cities are just so overwhelmingly Democratic, and the fact that in some cases you have to draw districts where African Americans or Latinos are the majority of the vote. So remember, African Americans typically vote around 90% Democratic. So if you have an overwhelmingly black district, what you would also have is an overwhelmingly Democratic district. Now, you only need 50% plus one to win a race. Whenever you have a district that's, say, 80 or 90% Democratic, it's kind of the same thing that you would do as far as racial gerrymandering. That you would maybe try to pack African Americans into as few districts as possible and then split them up across the state. There's actually another type of gerrymandering that I think is important to mention because it kind of been stamped out since the 1960s, but I'm afraid it might be making a comeback given the new Supreme Court, and that's population gerrymandering. Whoever wins elections this year, because this is a census year, districts across the country have to be redrawn in 2021 and 2022. Whoever wins control of a lot of state legislatures this year will have the ability to draw new districts for everything from the U.S. House of Representatives, state legislatures, to city councils, to county legislatures, you know, all the way down. You know, one of the things about New York is that we are likely to lose 1 or 2 seats in the U.S. House, depending on how the census comes out. You know, this will have a major effect on who controls, you know, different legislatures and the House of Representatives for the next decade because of how the districts are going to be drawn. the big answer is that, as far as if there's a split control of Congress, is that not a lot will get done other than things that basically have to get done. You have to consider in the Senate for most legislation, at least right now, there's a 60 vote threshold in the Senate to overcome a filibuster. Will the Senate eliminate the filibuster next year? I think that it's very possible that they might to some degree. It's kind of like what you have now. You have Democrats in control of the House, Republicans in control of the Senate. Early on in the coronavirus, they were able to pass some relief bills because everybody seemed to be for it. But since then, the House has passed a relief bill, I think back in May, and the Senate has not been able to pass one because of the filibuster, and they haven't been able to agree on it. So I think that it would be that if either party has any major priorities, they probably would not get a lot done. The important thing also to remember about the Senate is that they have some powers that the House doesn't, that are completely independent of the House. And that is that the Senate votes on nominations of the president. So whether it be for the president's cabinet, for things like Secretary of State and Attorney General and so on down the line, but also judges. One of the things that more than a quarter of the federal judiciary right now are Trump-appointed judges. Having control of the presidency and the Senate, that would be kind of, if you had to only have one, that would be your kind of preferred one, because they would be able to confirm nominees to the administration and the judiciary. One thing to remember there is that for nominations, there is no filibuster. It only takes a majority of the vote in the Senate to bring a vote on a nominee to have a vote on. For those of you that aren't familiar with what a filibuster is, traditionally it was that you talked a bill to death, that somebody would have to hold the floor for hours and hours and hours. But now essentially what it is that it's a rule that requires you to cut off debate to just 3/5 of the Senate, which is 60 votes. If there's more states, the 3/5 will change. It essentially gives the minority party, if they have 41 votes or more, a veto over most things that go on in the Senate. I think the answer to that is yes, but it's a little more complicated than that, just saying a shift in the spectrum. So sometimes we talk about realigning elections in the country. Basically what that is that you come to an election and just you have massive changes. What we have seen lately is there has been realignment and there's been shifts. So people have kind of reconfigured who they're supporting. Now, some of them have kind of offset each other for a while. And some of these have been long-term trends that during the Trump administration have accelerated. And some of them have been things that have just went boom. Since Trump has taken over. So what we kind of noticed in 2016 is that Republicans had been gaining among white working class voters, so whites with no college degree for a while, but Democrats were always able to have a decent chunk of these voters, be competitive with them. This is Trump's base, white voters with no college degree, in particular white men with no college degree. And also you've seen that Democrats kind of are collapsing in rural areas. When you had candidates like Bill Clinton, who was from kind of a rural state in Arkansas, Democrats still did pretty well in some rural areas in the country. What you had seen is that as the Democratic Party is seen as more urban and has become more socially liberal, they are just not competing as well in the urban areas. Democrats have long dominated urban areas, but they're dominating them even more. The big thing that has really popped during the Trump administration have been two groups: white voters with a college degree and suburban voters. Traditionally, you had where white voters that kind of had more of a postgraduate type degree were much more Democratic than others that didn't quite have, say, like a MBA or a JD or a PhD or an MD or some things like that. In the 2018 midterm elections, Democrats gained 40 seats in the House of Representatives. Many of the seats that they won were in the suburbs. Some of these were seats that 6 years before, say in 2012, when Barack Obama and Mitt Romney were running against each other, that nobody would have ever thought that Democrats would have ever had a shot at. Democrats had been gaining in some suburbs like outside of New York City or Philadelphia or Chicago or Detroit for a while. The places they hadn't were in the suburbs in the South. For instance, one of the things that you saw is that immediately after Trump was elected, there was a special election in a suburban Atlanta seat, kind of the North Atlanta suburbs. Mitt Romney had won the seat by 25 points. Trump had only won it by 3 points. So, just a massive shift between, a 4-year period. Democrats didn't win the special election, but they win the seat in 2018. What we're kind of looking at as far this year is, we see lots of public polls out, of the national races, and you see some at state level. We're seeing in suburban districts, enormous shifts from 2016 to 20. We're seeing shifts kind of in the spectrum as far as who are Democrats and who are Republicans. So a big question is going to be, Democrats all of a sudden have these new voters that kind of are moderate Republicans in the past, and now they're identifying as Democrats. That's one of the things that actually made it very hard for Bernie Sanders to win the primary this year, was that all of these people that used to be Republicans now are Democrats, and kind of moderate the Democratic Party. On the Republican side, what they have to be looking at is, if the election goes like it's looking now, where, it could be an absolute wipeout for them in the House and the Senate and the presidency.